Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Our mission here is to take a stack of your sources and, well, deliver that essential knowledge shortcut you need. We turn dense material into quick, memorable insights. Today we're focusing on Iran, which is, it's clearly a major geopolitical flashpoint, and it's facing one of the most challenging periods in its recent history. Based on everything we've extracted, the country is really standing at a critical crossroads.
It really is. It's a textbook example of a perfect storm. When you synthesize all the material, you see this convergence of what I call a triple punch. You've got economic collapse, widespread and sustained public protests, and then this increasing international pressure.
All at once.
All at once. So our goal today is to take a neutral, fact-based look at these core dynamics. We're focusing on the internal situation, its crucial role in the region, and, what the potential future outlook might be when these crises hit simultaneously.
Okay, let's unpack this. I think we have to start inside the country. Let's begin with the political structure, which the sources describe as, well, tightly controlled, but it's facing this undeniable and growing public dissatisfaction. It's a bit of a paradox, right? The security institutions play a dominant role, and a government's stated priority is that stability and sovereignty must be preserved at all costs. But how effective is that control proving to be?
That's the key tension. And what's fascinating here is the visible failure of recent leadership decisions to genuinely calm public anger. They are succeeding in enforcement, sure, but they seem to be failing in governance.
What do you mean by that?
Well, for years, there's been friction over prices, jobs, that kind of thing. But the crucial detail, the real pivot, is that dissent that was initially purely economic in nature. It's increasingly taken on these explicit systemic political tones. They're no longer just asking for better subsidies. They are demanding accountability for the failures.
So the economic grievance is the tinder, but now the fire is political. And that lets us establish the economic crisis as the true core problem. It's the engine driving almost all of this instability. We can't just say Iran's economy is under severe strain and move on. The listener needs those specific data points to really get the scale of the disaster.
Exactly. We need to ground this in reality. Saying the economy is bad is, generic. Understanding how bad it is, that's the deep dive. And the sources, they show some catastrophic figures that really illustrate the severity.
Let's start with the currency, because that seems like the most immediate pain point for everyone. The national currency, the rial, has lost a truly significant amount of value. What are the metrics we're seeing?
Well, in the last, say, 18 to 24 months, the rial has lost well over 50% of its value against the US dollar. And that's on the unofficial market, which is what really matters for most people.
And that loss is felt instantly.
Instantly. It's reflected in everything. Imports become astronomical. Domestic savings are just obliterated. For any government trying to maintain control, currency stability is paramount. This kind of collapse signals a profound loss of confidence.
And that collapse in currency value, it ties directly into the second critical detail you mentioned, hyperinflation. When the cost of imports doubles overnight, how does that translate into the daily life of an average citizen?
This is where we move from macroeconomic theory to, as you put it before, the crisis at the kitchen table. The latest figures show inflation hovering around 40 to 50% for general goods. But for specific staple items, it's much, much worse.
Like what?
We see details in the sources. For example, the cost of basic items like rice and cooking oil, essentials that are often subsidized, have jumped over 60% in a single year. When half your income is suddenly spent just on basic food, well, the political tolerance for failure just evaporates.
That makes perfect sense. People aren't necessarily economists, but they definitely track the price of bread. But we can't treat these internal pressures in isolation. The sources are very clear that a major factor is accelerating this pain. International sanctions.
They are a massive external complication. They function as this constant, suffocating drain on the economy. And when people hear sanctions, they often just think oil, but the reality is much more complex and targeted.
Walk us through the mechanisms then. How are these sanctions crippling the non-oil sectors and just general commerce?
The primary choke point is financial. Sanctions have severely restricted access to the global banking system, most notably the loss of access to the SWIFT interbank messaging system for key financial institutions.
Yeah, SWIFT, right.
So this makes conducting legitimate international trade agonizingly slow and expensive. It forces transactions into black markets or these highly complex, non-standard workarounds.
So even if a small Iranian business owner wants to import, say, basic machinery, they can't use standard international finance, which drives up their costs.
Yeah.
which then hits the consumer through inflation again.
Precisely. It's a vicious cycle. And while oil exports remain restricted, the sanctions also target other lucrative sectors: petrochemicals, metals, shipping insurance. This strategy is designed not just to cut revenue, but to disrupt the entire supply chain and industrial base, which is why the domestic labor market is so deeply constrained.
So if we look at the human cost, who's bearing the brunt of this pain on a daily basis?
The sources are very consistent on this. It's primarily the segments of society with the least financial cushion. So that means small business owners who rely on imports, daily wage workers whose income doesn't keep pace with inflation, and critically, young people. You have millions of highly educated young Iranians entering a labor market that is it's broken. It can't provide opportunity.
And when there's no hope for the future.
Frustration transforms into radical demands.
That brings us perfectly to the evolution of the protests. What started as this, basic decentralized frustration over prices and unemployment has now evolved into a truly nationwide diverse movement. The scope and spread are clearly noteworthy.
The scale is what makes this so different. This isn't localized discontent anymore. It is systemic and geographically widespread. We've seen demonstrations spread across multiple major cities, far beyond the traditional protest centers. And what makes this phase so challenging for the authorities is the sheer diversity of the participants.
Can you elaborate on that diversity? Is it just students, or is the base broader now?
Oh, it's far broader. While young people and students often start these movements, the momentum really comes from the convergence of different groups. You see strikes from powerful labor groups like industrial workers and truckers. You see mobilization among various ethnic minority communities seeking greater rights. And critically, you see middle-class professionals demanding economic stability and a reduction in corruption. This breadth signals a widespread loss of faith across different socioeconomic strata.
And their demands have fundamentally shifted.
Yeah.
They're not just asking for economic relief anymore, but demanding systemic change. What do the sources indicate are the core political demands now?
Beyond the immediate need for subsidies and jobs, the demands focus on political accountability and transparency. They want to know why massive state resources seem to disappear or are directed away from the public good. More fundamentally, many groups are demanding substantive political freedoms and a reassessment of how power is allocated internally.
And the response from the state? It hasn't been dialogue or meaningful reform. It's been a focus on rapid control measures.
The official response has been consistent. Warnings, followed by swift, sometimes overwhelming force. We see mass arrests, strict control measures, including deliberate internet throttling and shutdowns in specific regions. It's all intended to quell the unrest and prevent protesters from organizing. The government frames these actions entirely through the lens of preserving national security.
Let's pause on that point for a moment, because what happens after the crackdown is actually the key insight here. This cycle, protest, crackdown, control, it's not resolving the core issue, is it?
No, not at all. It's actually digging the hole deeper. The cycle of protest and crackdown continues to widen the already yawning gap between the state and society. Each time the authorities rely purely on security measures, they erode what little social contract remains. And that just guarantees that the next wave of discontent will be even larger and more difficult to manage. The societal fault line is widening because they're addressing symptoms, the protests, not the disease.
Which is the economic collapse and governance failure.
Exactly.
So now we have to zoom out, because Iran's internal situation is not an isolated affair. Its domestic instability doesn't stay neatly within its own borders. It ripples globally, and that instantly creates external risk.
That's absolutely critical. The internal instability is instantly viewed through a geopolitical lens because of Iran's active regional role. Relations with the United States and Europe, they remain profoundly tense, which creates a high-friction environment for any diplomatic engagement, especially around issues like the nuclear program.
But Iran doesn't just passively respond to external pressure. It actively projects power across the Middle East. Why does that make its internal situation an immediate concern for its neighbors?
Iran asserts significant influence through a network of allies and proxy groups across the region, in Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Yemen. This sustained regional engagement means that if the central government becomes weaker or more unstable at home, that instability could create a vacuum or a sudden, unpredictable shift in policy regarding these groups. And that changes the entire regional security equation, potentially risking escalation in existing conflicts.
So that dual-threat internal unpredictability combined with regional projection, that's precisely why global powers are watching so closely. What are the two main sort of non-negotiable drivers of that intense global interest?
It's security and energy concerns. and they are inextricably linked. On the security front, you have the stability of crucial international waterways like the Strait of Hormuz. A massive percentage of the world's oil supply passes through there. Any internal turmoil that leads to military action or disruption in the strait would have immediate, catastrophic global implications.
And that ties directly into the energy component. We're talking about massive oil reserves. If internal instability disrupts production or, crucially, export capabilities.
The global oil markets react instantly. Even the threat of disruption causes spikes in price. For the global economy, reliable access to that energy supply is non-negotiable. So the strategic interests of major powers is less about which political faction wins and more about ensuring internal stability, even if it's tenuous, is maintained to protect those global security and energy flows.
So if we connect this to the bigger picture, the key takeaway is powerful. Any instability in Iran, whether it's driven by economic collapse or political protests, it has the potential to destabilize the entire region. And that affects global security and really the pocketbooks of people everywhere.
It truly is an interconnected system. Domestic failure has immediate international consequences.
Let's bring this conversation to a close by reinforcing that central idea. Iran stands at a decisive moment. The future will be fundamentally shaped by the choices made internally, right now, and how those choices are either mitigated or exacerbated by external forces.
Right. The core conclusion of this deep dive has to be that Iran's current crisis is far more than just economic. It's a simultaneous triple crisis that is fundamentally political, social, and geopolitical. And because these forces are so tightly intertwined, there is no single easy fix. Resolving the economy requires addressing political governance, while managing social unrest requires both economic relief and, a reduction in that state-society friction.
And based on the sources, the future path seems to run along 3 definable tracks, each one competing for dominance.
Yes. Track 1 is genuine economic reform, aimed at reducing public anger, improving living standards. That's the path of de-escalation. Track 2 is continued repression, a reliance on security control, which the sources suggest may only intensify future unrest. And then there's Track 3, the growing external pressure from sanctions, regional conflicts, which could further complicate and constrain internal stability. It could potentially force an immediate, unpredictable choice between the first 2 tracks.
The situation is intensely complex, and the stakes for the world are very high.
And that leads us to a final provocative thought for you to consider as you process all this. We've established that global powers closely monitor Iran because of security and energy concerns. As public pressure inside Iran increases,